The sports world, of course, turning again with conference realignment craziness going on. The Texas-Oklahoma thing it's a reality. It's kind of a done deal. It's just now it's going to be how much sooner than 2025 do they actually join the SEC than 2025?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was next year, the 2023, I guess 22-23 season. But it definitely won't be 2025. You can look at, they want out. They don't really want them in. It never works out great when people are doing things they don't really want to do. And they'll just find that the SEC has money. Texas and Oklahoma have money. They'll find a way to get the money to the rest of the Big 12 schools. And then the big question will be how the Big 12 can survive.
Yeah, you've got Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12, openly calling ESPN out for all the things that they've done, their involvements, and basically trying to dissolve the Big 12, which would alleviate Texas and Oklahoma of their payments. It would alleviate ESPN of their contractual obligations. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and the life of a conference.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how blindsided he was. I mean, he's a conference commissioner with as much. He might be the longest tenured conference commissioner, and he looks like he was either asleep or they did it. It's hard to believe in today's day when there aren't many secrets, but they did an unbelievable job of keeping this quiet from everybody and totally blindsided him. And he's of the 5, quote, Power 5 leagues, they look like they're definitely the most vulnerable one because they haven't done well in the college football playoff anyway, and they lost their 2 best programs. And they don't really have a football powerhouse left in the group. And we both know that football rules the way this thing is going to be reshaped. And if you don't have a program that people want to watch in football, it puts you in a bad position.
And then now what is the next move for the Big 12? I mean, I don't know. Are they going to file suit? What are they going to do? Because they're going to have to do something to stop, or their league is gone, because the AAC, who I thought the conference would have been to try to poach these other teams, but that's who Bowlesby was apparently talking about with ESPN. They have talked to some of the other members already. Right. And so now it's like, what's the next move with college sports? Is there going to be a lawsuit over this?
Yeah, you would think so, because we've seen it in the past when these kinds of things have gone down. But then at some point quickly after that, it goes into survival mode of each of these individual schools are going to have to realize it's sort of a game of musical chairs, and we need to find a seat at a table that we can survive at. And sitting back in the Big 12 probably isn't the best strategy. And so I'm sure we've already heard of the teams at Iowa State and Kansas that have made overtures to the Big 10. We've heard about, some kind of alliance between the Big 12 schools and the Pac-12. And then we've heard the AAC schools are interested in the 8 leftover schools. So it'll be a matter of the 8 remaining schools. At some point, it's like, yeah, we're in this together. But if I have a chair over there, see you later.
Yeah, because you've got too many big time players out there, like the Big 10. What do they do next? But before that, you've got looking at your piece. From WDRB.com, and I love anytime you can get a comment from Barry Switzer. It's always great. But talking about Switzer and better actually, Steve Spurrier. He's the one. But those guys and how I think they're like fans. They're like, but they don't see the wisdom, and I don't either. And Spurrier correctly pointed out, hell, they can't win the Big 12. What are they going to do in the SEC that is so much more dominant? I know that they're probably thinking that it's going to enhance their recruiting because Texas A&M's recruiting has been enhanced since they entered the SEC, and I guess that's the only thing because they've had their independence of sorts. They've been a conference member, but yet they have their own TV network, which is a rarity. I don't know, what are they really gaining by going over there?
I guess they're gaining the reflected strength of the SEC, just be able to tell people you're in the SEC. helps you puff out your chest a little bit more. Maybe it helps you in terms of recruiting. I think one of the big issues for Texas was that Texas A&M, who Texas had always sort of looked down upon, now can go in across the state of Texas and say, yeah, Texas has this, this, and this, but our facilities are just as good. We've got a coach who won a national championship in Jimbo Fisher, and you're going to play against Alabama, Auburn, and LSU every year in the best conference in the country. They had sort of gained an upper hand on Texas in terms of recruiting. And we've not only seen that, I mean, this year, I think the two best quarterbacks in the state of Texas, one's going to Clemson and one's going to Ohio State. So I think they kind of fear that they need to come up with something to get the attention back. And what they're coming up with is playing the SEC. That it's easy to, I guess, to get there, but to win there is another story. And Saban's going to be there. I mean, look, Jimbo Fisher's been at A&M 3 or 4 years. He hasn't come close to really denting them. Orgeron had the big run again, got knocked way back on his heels last year. Gus Malzahn was a really good coach at Auburn. He got fired. I mean, you can go in there and have a pretty good team and have a mediocre record.
Brett Bielema back to the Big Ten.
Brett Bielema, he got bounced. We'll see what Lane Kiffin can do, and we're going to see what Mike Leach can do. But it's not a very forgiving league.
Not at all. And does this alone force college football to go to 12 teams in the playoff? I think it has to. I think it does already immediately. The SEC is not going to be happy with potentially only getting 2 teams, and even though that's a lot, because they're going to have so many teams that they'll probably have 4 teams at all times in the top 10 at all times.
Right. Actually, I think it hurts the expansion of the playoff. I've read some stuff from the Pac-12 commissioner and a couple of other people saying that they kind of feel like they were misled, that the SEC knew they were going to this all along. And while they knew they were going to add Texas and Oklahoma, and so they're creating the 16-team conference, and the reason they want to go to a 12-team playoff is so they can get 4 or 5 teams in the playoff, and maybe they need to slow play this. And I've heard some other college people outside the SEC endorse that idea of saying, let's not rush into 12 yet.
Big Ten Commissioner Warren talked about Bowlesby being blindsided. There's no doubt that Kevin Warren was blindsided because we were at Big Ten Media Days when this story broke, and you could tell there was no. And I can't blame Warren for not. If Bowlesby was blindsided, you can't blame Warren for being blindsided. But even if he hadn't have been, I don't know that there would have been a plan in place because there didn't seem to be a lot of plans in place other than good touchy-feely talk from him this year. Not hard Big Ten. Typical, this is what we're going to do, and and this is the plan. He doesn't seem to ever have a plan. He seemed to be more reactionary than actionary.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're in the situation we're in. If you look across the college football landscape, Greg Sankey's probably the shrewdest guy in the room. He's been on the job a little bit longer, was around Mike Slive even before, and then I knew how Mike Slive operated. Bowlesby is a bit of a older guy who I don't think really still has his fastball. And the other 3 leagues all have new commissioners. Warren's been in this starting his 2nd year. Jim Phillips just starting at ACC. And the new guys just starting at the Pac-12. To me, it was a perfect time for a move like that because you're dealing with some novice commissioners. And, it worked. There have been times in the past where people have raised the possibility of Texas coming to the Big Ten. I remember during the last round of realignment, I think people kind of poo-pooed it, saying Texas doesn't really have anything in common with Big Ten schools geographically. I mean, it's not a contiguous state to any Big Ten schools, but it does have the academic profile. But Commissioner Delaney didn't want to be that bold. Well, Craig Sankey was that bold, and now the SEC has created this monster.
And the other conferences, you talk about the Power 5. Well, the Power 5 is no more really power. There's no longer 5 Power 5 conferences.
Right.
They've lost their power. There's ACC they're a Power 5 in basketball, right, but not in football. And so there's such a distortion of power now in college athletics on different sports. But The ACC, what do they do? They absolutely just suck in football. I mean, they are terrible as a conference, but they have a champion, but then you've got nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the ACC has Clemson, and North Carolina is ascending. They're probably a top 15, maybe a top 10 team, but you don't really consider them a traditional football power. What the ACC needs to get its mojo back is for Florida State and Miami and Virginia Tech to become what they were 10 or 15 years ago. They really haven't done it for a while. I mean, think back to the great Hurricanes teams, or even the Bobby Bowden FSU teams, or the Mike Vick Virginia Tech teams. And they need Louisville to get back what they were a few years ago when Lamar Jackson was there. But the big problem the ACC has is they do have their network now. I think it's been online, 2 years, the ACC network? But the amount of revenue they're getting from their league compared to what the SEC and the Big Ten is getting from its network is maybe half. And it's a long contract, and everybody talks about it. Whenever you read Pete Thamel or 40 or these guys writing about the national college football scene, they always talk about the ACC's terrible television contract, and they're stuck with it for like a decade unless they find some way to merge or enhance their league.
And there's been talk about, for the Big Ten, you look at, there's been a USC, UCLA chatter because of the LA market. But then that destroys relationships between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. But I don't know that matters anymore. Relationships are kind of going out the door. Does somebody from the ACC bolt? Does somebody from the Pac-12 bolt? Because the Big Ten does offer a big golden parachute. They've got the golden ticket if you join.
Yeah, I'm so much of a traditionalist. I really have a hard time seeing those teams in the Big Ten. And, even the football thing of it, that's just one trip every other year, or I guess one a year if you're going to UCLA and USC and you rotate it. But, I mean, people totally discount and forget this affects other sports. I mean, are UCLA and USC going to want to come play? They got really good baseball programs and softball programs. Are they going to want to come play softball games in March at Wisconsin or Michigan or wherever? Or, it affects, the travel costs. And as basketball fans, you look at Indiana fans travel quite well. I mean, playing a regular season basketball game at USC or UCLA, I guess there's alums out there who go to the game. It's just that I can see where it makes sense for one football game, but when you throw in all the other sports, it doesn't make sense.